All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into a case that'll really stick with you.
Oh, absolutely. This one's a real head scratcher.
We're talking about Robert Hayes, a convicted serial killer who operated in Florida. And, well, this is one of the stories that really makes you wonder about the people around us.
Totally. You see someone every day and think you know them, but
Exactly. And that's what we're going to try to unravel today. We'll look at Hayes's early life, get into the nitty-gritty of the crimes, and explore how this relatively new investigative tool, genetic genealogy, finally brought him down.
yeah, genetic genealogy is changing the game in so many ways. But what gets me about Hayes is that contrast. Like, on the surface, a seemingly normal guy, but underneath, pure darkness.
Yeah, that whole don't judge a book by its cover thing, right?
Right.
So let's rewind. Before the headlines, before the murders, who was Robert Hayes?
Well, on paper, Hayes had a pretty typical upbringing. Born in 1982 in West Palm Beach, Florida, one of four kids. Yeah. Pretty average, right? But things weren't always rosy. His dad was murdered not long after he was born, and there were some reports suggesting suggesting he might have faced some abuse growing up, even molested by a family member as a child.
Man, that's heavy stuff. Makes you think about the scars we carry, how those early experiences shape us.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's a tricky thing, right? Trying to connect those dots between childhood trauma and something as extreme as becoming a serial killer.
Of course, of course.
Uh,
But you can't help but wonder.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. Despite all that, despite the tough hand he was dealt, most people saw Hayes as a friendly, helpful guy. He had a girlfriend, even had a kid.
So, like, two sides to the same coin, a friendly face hiding something much darker.
You got it. And this Hayes went to college, studied criminal justice at Bethune-Cookman College, even graduated with a degree in the field.
He studied criminal justice.
I know.
Seriously, that's more than a little creepy knowing what we know now. Any theories out there about why he chose that path?
Oh, yeah. Investigators have tossed around a few ideas. Some think it was like a morbid fascination, an obsession with the criminal mind. Others say maybe he was playing the long game, learning how investigations work so he could avoid getting caught. Hard to say for sure, but it definitely adds to the mystery, right?
No doubt about it. So we have this guy, seemingly average, but with a troubled past, and this very unsettling choice of study. When did things go from, a little off to seriously dark?
The first murders linked to Hayes happened in Daytona Beach between December 2005 and February 2006. We're talking about Laketta Mae Gunther, Julie Green, and Iwana Patton. All women, all tragically found shot to death.
Was there anything that connected these women? Any similarities?
Yeah, all three were known to have worked in the sex trade in the Daytona Beach area. And they were all found in pretty similar locations. And get this, the killer didn't even try that hard to hide the bodies.
So, not exactly subtle, huh? It's almost like he wanted them to be found.
Right. And here's another thing that'll give you chills. After Iwana Patton's murder, someone called the police anonymously to tell them where to find her body.
Wow, that's bone-chilling. Talk about taunt.
Yeah, totally messed up. They traced the call, of course, but it led to a dead end. Can you imagine the pressure on those investigators, though? Horrific crimes, a potential pattern emerging, and then this creepy phone call out of the blue.
Sounds like a nightmare scenario. And I read somewhere that there were actually some missteps in the early investigation.
That's right. They actually questioned Hayes early on, but dismissed him as a suspect. Some folks believe that a racial profile of the killer that was circulating at the time, which turned out to be inaccurate, might have played a role in that.
You're kidding me. They had him in their sights, and they let him go.
Yep.
Unbelievable. It's heartbreaking to think about how many lives might have been saved if things had gone differently. So, what happened next?
Well, tragically, in 2007, another woman, Stacey Charlene Gage, was found dead. Same MO, shot in the head, circumstances similar to the previous murders.
Another victim, another chilling echo of those earlier cases. Did this change the course of the investigation? I mean, did it finally get some traction?
It did. They formed a task force, really ramped things up, started collecting DNA samples from drivers who fit a certain profile, white males with girlfriends, hoping for a hit. But even with all that, the case went cold for years.
Years. Man, that's an eternity for families waiting for answers. Anything else happened during those years?
Oh yeah, a big one. In 2016, the body of Rachel Elizabeth Bay was found by the side of a highway in Palm Beach County. This time, though, it was different. She'd been strangled and beaten, signs of a struggle.
Another victim, but a new MO. Did they connect this to the Daytona Beach Killer right away?
Not at first. It was only after they analyzed the DNA from Bay's murder that the connection was made.
A connection. Oh, wait, you mean?
The DNA from Bay's murder matched the DNA they'd collected at those Daytona Beach crime scenes. Finally, a solid lead after all those years.
Wow, that must have been a huge turning point in the case. But how did they go from, a DNA match to an actual suspect?
This is where it gets really interesting. The case cracked wide open thanks to, thanks to genetic genealogy.
I've heard that term thrown around, but I gotta admit, I don't really get how it works.
It's pretty clever, actually. They took the DNA from those crime scenes and uploaded it to public genealogy databases, the kind people use to trace their family trees.
Like Ancestry.com and stuff.
Exactly. By comparing the crime scene DNA to the DNA in those databases, they were able to build a family tree. And slowly but surely, they narrowed it down until, boom, Robert Hayes popped up as their main suspect.
It's wild to think that spitting in a tube for a genealogy test could help crack a murder case, right? Like a digital fingerprint for your whole family. But hold on, if Hayes himself hadn't uploaded his DNA to one of those sites, how did they confirm it was him?
Well, a bit of luck and a whole lot of smarts. They knew they had their guy, so they put him under surveillance, just waiting for their chance.
Yeah.
And that chance came in the form of, well, a discarded cigarette butt.
They got his DNA from a cigarette butt. Talk about thinking outside the box.
It was a brilliant move. They tested the DNA from that cigarette, and there is a perfect match. They finally had their man.
It's amazing how a tiny little thing like a cigarette butt can be the missing piece of the puzzle, huh? So they had their DNA match. Hayes is in custody. What happened next?
Well, they wasted no time.
Yeah.
In September 2019, Hayes was arrested at his place in West Palm Beach, charged with first-degree murder for Rachel Beege's death. And then they transferred him over to Volusia County to face 3 more counts of first-degree murder for those Daytona Beach killings.
4 counts of first-degree murder. That's some serious stuff. What was the prosecution's strategy? What were they going for?
Well, given the severity of the crimes and all the evidence they had stacked up, prosecutors initially went for the death penalty.
Wow, the death penalty. That's a huge decision. How did the defense how did they handle that?
Oh, Hayes' defense team, they fought tooth and nail, explored every single avenue. They dug into his past, looking for anything that could, maybe sway the jury, anything that could be seen as a mitigating factor.
I bet. I mean, it's got to be tough defending someone accused of such horrible crimes. But, everyone deserves a fair trial, right? No matter what they're accused of. So,
Yeah.
so what happened? What was the outcome?
The trial kicked off in February of 2022. Weeks of witness testimony, evidence presented, the whole 9 yards. And in the end, the jury found Robert Hayes guilty. Guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Laketta Gunther, Julie Green, and Iwana Patton.
Guilty on 3 counts. What about Rachel Bay's murder? Was there a separate trial for that?
Well, even though the DNA tied Hayes to Bay's murder, they didn't actually try him for that crime. You see, with those 3 life sentences, he got, 3 consecutive life sentences.
Right, he's never getting out.
Exactly. So from a legal standpoint, another trial, it just wasn't necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense. 3 consecutive life sentences. That means he'll be behind bars, no chance of parole, right?
That's right. Robert Hayes is going to spend the rest of his days in prison.
I gotta say, it's a relief knowing he can't hurt anyone else. But there's no escaping the fact that this is a messy, complicated case. It really raises some tough questions.
It does, doesn't it? It makes you think about, the nature of evil, the whole good versus bad thing, and how our past experiences can really shape us, even if we don't realize it.
Yeah, no kidding. And it also makes you think about how far we've come with, things like forensic science. Without genetic genealogy, this case might still be cold. Who knows how many other families are going to get answers thanks to this technology.
Absolutely. Genetic genealogy is a game changer, no doubt about it. But even with all that, there are still some mysteries surrounding this case.
Oh, really?
Well, remember Stacy Charlene Gage, the 4th victim in Daytona Beach?
Mm-hmm.
Hayes is still the prime suspect in her murder.
Right, but they never officially charged him for that one, did they?
Nope. Even though investigators are pretty sure he did it, they just didn't have enough evidence to make it stick.
Man, that's got to be tough for her family, No real closure, no definitive answer.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow. It reminds us that sometimes, even with all the fancy technology in the world, we can't always get all the answers.
It's true. Sometimes the pieces just don't all fit together. Are there any other unanswered questions in this case? Anything else that just doesn't quite add up?
Well, there's the whole thing with Reagan Kendall and Lisa Marie French. We touched on those cases
Oh,
earlier.
yeah, yeah, I remember those names. What was the deal with those?
Well, get this, turns out. Both of their murders were linked to other perpetrators, completely separate from Hayes. Kendall's case was, it was a complicated love triangle situation. And French's murder, well, they connected that to a serial rapist, a guy named Jerry Lee Williams Jr., he's doing life right now.
Wow, so two cases that initially seemed like they might be connected to Hayes, but then totally unrelated.
Yeah, talk about a curveball, right?
Yeah.
Shows you how these investigations can take some wild turns. So while we know for sure that Hayes is responsible for 4 murders, we can't completely rule out the possibility of other victims.
Man, it's a scary thought that there might be other victims out there, their families still searching for answers, not knowing that their loved one's disappearance could be tied to this guy.
It's a sobering thought, for sure. It reminds us that the search for truth, the fight for justice, it never really ends.
It's heavy stuff for sure. It makes you realize how these cases, these stories, they impact so many people in ways we can't even imagine. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Robert Hayes case, what are the biggest takeaways? What should we remember about this whole thing?
For me, it's the layers of this case that really stand out. You have this guy, seemingly ordinary, blended right into society, even went and got himself a criminal justice degree, right?
Yeah.
But then there's this dark side, this violent side that took the lives of at least 4 women. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it really is. Makes you question your own judgment, like how well can we ever really know anyone?
Exactly. But it also makes you appreciate how far we've come with, forensic science and all that. I mean, genetic genealogy, that was the key here. Took a case that had been cold for years and brought it to a close. Finally gave those families some answers, some peace.
It's a good reminder that even when things seem hopeless, there's always hope. Hope for answers, hope for justice.
Absolutely. And we also see the importance of, never giving up. Think about it. If those investigators hadn't connected Rachel B's murder to those Daytona Beach cases, if they hadn't thought to use genetic genealogy, if they hadn't been patient enough to wait for that cigarette butt, I mean, who knows?
He might still be out there.
Exactly. Scary thought, right?
Definitely.
But it also shows how dedicated those folks in law enforcement are, never giving up, even when the odds are stacked against them.
So what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this deep dive into the Robert Hayes case?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this story, the Robert Hayes story, it might not be over. There's always that chance, even if it's a small one, that there are more victims out there, victims we don't know about yet.
Yeah, that's a haunting thought. And it brings us back to that question we keep coming back to. Could there be more to this story than we know?
I think it's a question worth asking. If this deep dive has, sparked your interest, I really encourage you to do your own digging. Read more about the case, learn more about this whole genetic genealogy thing. It's fascinating stuff.
Great advice. And remember, everyone, sometimes the people who seem the most normal, the most everyday, can be hiding some pretty dark secrets. Stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.